Hi, this is Eric, and I'm back with another video. It is July 9th, 2025. And the reason why I'm doing this little talk here is for two reasons, actually. There's somebody that I respect greatly, one of the commentators in the alternative news space, named Andrei Martyanov, and he was born in the Soviet Union, and when the Soviet Union, he was trained as a naval officer, actually, and he's a real expert on military affairs. That's his specialty. Um, but he is, because he's I think probably around 60 years old or so. When the Soviet Union fell apart, or it ended, there was tremendous turmoil in the former Soviet space. He was actually born and raised. I think it was in Azerbaijan or Armenia, one of those two Caucasus republics. And but he's ethnic Russian, and he decided to come to the United States because there was no career prospects or whatever, and he built a life here. But he's very loyal to the United States. He feels like it has great potential as a country, but he's, I guess you could say, very disappointed in it in its current state. At one point he said something like, the baby boomers are just this, spoiled bunch of kids who never did anything. And I took kind of umbrage of that because that's my generation. So the second thing that happened was I was listening to Max Blumenthal, who is the next generation under mine. I think he's in his late 40s or something, but he's one of the great journalists these days. And he was talking with his partner Aaron Mate, who they're both writers for the Gray Zone. And he brought up the song by Bob Dylan, "Masters of War." And I thought, and he said, hardly anybody's ever heard of that. And I thought, I did a blog post on that a while back. It's on my website, but I didn't post it on Substack. So what I've done is transposed all the content from my bubblebuddhist.com website and put it onto my ericarno.substack.com blog post site. But what this is, what I'm talking about, is the fact that the my generation, came of age at a time with the civil rights movement. There was huge effort to create voting rights and civil rights for African Americans, and there was tremendous intellectual turmoil or intellectual ferment in the whole alternative space. You had the beatniks during the 1950s that were a little bit before my time, but then you had the hippies of the 1960s, and they were experimenting with ideas. They were living in communes and things like that, and yeah, there were various excesses, like a lot of drugs and sex and rock and roll, but it also had a very strong anti-war component to it. So I thought what I would do is post, because people have this idea that my generation never didn't care about anything. What I've done is I posted a bunch of songs and artists who sang these songs, and a lot of them are very powerful. So it starts off with a picture of John Lennon singing, "All we are saying is give peace a chance." That was during the Vietnam War, and of course. So he was very politically. What happened with the Beatles? They started off as kind of this bubblegum, rock and roll group where I want to hold your hand, and these sort of simple teenage romance type songs. But then they took acid and something changed in their consciousness, and I think George Harrison went off into the more spiritual space. Paul McCartney and Ringo remained kind of apolitical, but John Lennon became quite political. And so he sang a lot of songs, like, as I say, "Give Peace a Chance," and imagine a world, at peace, "Working Man Hero," and So 10 years after the Beatles broke up, he planned to come back. He was staying in New York, and he was shot to death. It was a clear hit by the deep state because this guy, John Lennon, cared about issues and he wanted to, raise consciousness. So he was one person, but there were many others. So, for example, I'm just going to run through these. Let's see. So the first song that I have that I'm posting here is called Bold Marauder by Richard Farina. And he starts off by saying, "Hi ho, hey hey, I am the bold marauder. Hi ho, hey hey, I am the white destroyer." And this is a song about empire and how empire was basically, it's like an anthem to the stooges and the vassals that he's going to bring the empire to, and you better do what he says, do what the empire says. And but he died in a suspicious motorcycle accident after getting death threats. So that was one guy, and I post the song there. I think it's a very powerful song, and it has all the lyrics with it. And then the next song I have is by Phil Ochs, and Phil Ochs was a very popular protest singer. And he sang lots of protest songs, and I've got two of them here. One of them is called Going on the Shores of Santo Domingo, which is about the Marines who have landed on the shores of Santo Domingo, the island in the Caribbean. This is an example of U.S. imperialism. And then he sang another song called The Ballad of Medgar Evers. And Medgar Evers was a civil rights activist, an African-American civil rights activist who was assassinated. And sure enough, Phil Ochs, his career went into decline as the peace movement kind of lost momentum, I guess you could say. He went to Africa, I believe, and lo and behold, someone slit his throat, putting his musical career to an end. He had an incredible voice. He was a great guitarist, and eventually either committed suicide or he was suicided. We don't know what happened exactly. A lot of times we don't know what happened. So that was Phil Ochs. Then you had, let's see, let me scroll down here. Bob Dylan, and this song, this is called Masters of War. And Max Blumenthal specifically cited this song, Masters of War. I had this is like June 25th, I think I posted this. So I'm this guy, 76 years old, and I was talking about, Bob Dylan's songs, the Masters of War. It's a very powerful song, and Max points out it is directly speaking to our time. The people who are running our country, they're masters of war. All they care about is killing for profit. It's a really terrible situation. But Bob Dylan was writing about this stuff in 1963. So we're talking, what is that? It's like 60 years practically. Bob Dylan, and apparently Bob Dylan was got into a motorcycle accident somehow, and his brain got scrambled, and he gave up his activist singing, his protest singing, and his as Max pointed out, that was the Bob Dylan who was the real Bob Dylan. Everything since then has been, it completely watered down from the message that he was so powerfully communicating in many, many different songs. So then during the Vietnam War, I came of age. I was 18. I was 20 years old, I guess, in 1968, and just as there was a convention in Chicago, I think it was last year, the Democratic Convention in Chicago. Well, in 1968, there was also a Democratic Convention in Chicago, and I went there with a friend of mine, and we were in a park across the street from the Democratic Party convention headquarters, and we were watching police bashing people's heads in. These are people who oppose the war. They're peace activists. They're demonstrating for peace. And the Democratic Party there was Hubert Humphrey, who was basically a party hack, who was called in to be, he was the vice president under Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson was forced to resign because of all the anti-war protests. They were saying stuff like, "Hey, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today?" And so that was a very common thing that we said at those in those days. And then but Hubert Humphrey was kind of tapped by the Democratic Party to be the standard bearer for them against Richard Nixon. But there was, of course, Robert F. Kennedy. He started to get a lot of momentum to be the presidential candidate. He would have almost certainly secured the nomination, and he was shot to death. And that left Eugene McCarthy, who was a good guy. He was like a moderate Democrat, but he was against the Vietnam War. And he just got brushed aside, and the Democratic Party went on its merry way, as it always does, starting wars. And the people in the you could say the left wing of the Democratic Party are always talking about, we're the party of peace. Well, no, you're not the party of peace. You're the wing of the party that they drag along to get votes so they can stay in power, so they can keep the wars going and break their promises to you, which they do every single time since they killed Kennedy in 1963. So there were massive protests at that time. I show a poster of student strike against Vietnam War and the racist draft, and here's another one from a local newspaper: 600 U.S. troops given Democratic Convention duty. So they're bringing in soldiers, to protect the corrupt Democratic Party from us. And so let's see what else we've got here. There's a saying here, a quote here, about 18,000 Chicago police, Secret Service agents, and National Guardsmen battled thousands of hippies and yippies, as well as television cameramen and newspaper reporters who were attempting to report on the situation. Police attacked the reporters, broke cameras, used tear gas and clubs on protesters who tried to get close to the convention site. In a speech from the podium, Senator Abraham Rubakoff, remember him, referred to the Gestapo tactics on the streets of Chicago. The Battle of Michigan Avenue gave the city a long-enduring black eye. So that went on. That was 1968. And then 1970, Nixon becomes the president. He became the president because he undermined peace negotiations between Lyndon Johnson administration and the South Vietnamese and the North Vietnamese, this was a quote-unquote civil war, of course, fomented by the United States. I referred to this kind of tactic that they use in Tibet. They did the same thing in Vietnam. Vietnam was one country. The United States goes in, they split off half the country, and they say, "Oh, we're defending democracy," or we're opposing communism. But in any case, Lyndon Johnson loses the election. Nixon has a secret plan to end the war, and the war didn't end until 1975 when the Vietnamese finally kicked our asses out of Vietnam. But although it's true that he did draw down the troops, that I'll hand that to him. But in 1970, when Nixon bombed Cambodia, which was a total violation of the Constitution, the president does not have right to wage wars on a country without the Congress declaring war. But we do it all the time. It's been since World War II. We've always been declaring war, rather undeclared war, and attacking countries. We just did it in Iran, but we did it back then in 1970. And the college campuses, of which that was my senior year, we just went wild. And there were 1 million people who went down to Washington, D.C. I was there, and a reporter asked me, what do you think of Nixon? And I was about to say something. I basically I said, he's a dangerous person. He's going to get us into trouble. I wanted to say something a little bit stronger, but I thought, I don't know who this guy is. He's going to haul me off to jail for, whatever. Anyway, so there was, but so there was protests all over the country, and there was one particular protest at a college called Kent State University, and sure enough, the Ohio National Guard came to the university, and they shot 4 people dead, 4 unarmed demonstrators. One of them, I think, wasn't even a demonstrator; he was just a bystander, and the soldiers, shot these kids to death. They're, like my age, like 20 years old or something like that. So as a result, one of the major rock and roll groups at that time, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, sang a song called Ohio, and it's a very powerful song. They killed us, President Nixon's coming. They're gunning us down. It's just, this is what's been going on. So now the next video I have on this blog post is called "Sir No Sir," and that talked about basically ongoing mutiny against the officers who were sending these young guys. During that time, there was a strong possibility that if you weren't in college, you could be drafted and sent to Vietnam to kill and be killed. And so at a certain point, I had a personal friend who what he did was he thought, how am I going to get out of this draft? And he voluntarily checked into a mental hospital. And at a certain point, the staff thought, we don't think this guy is crazy. So the draft board came to the hospital, and they said, so what do you have to say for yourself? And he said, you guys are a bunch of, warmongering creeps, and I will have absolutely nothing to do with you. I will resist you. I will not tolerate being dragged into this and fighting for you, jerks. So something to that effect. And he went off to Canada to avoid the draft, and his mother got a letter from the draft board. He says, "Okay, Mom, what did the letter say? What did the letter say?" And she's reading it. He says, "No, go to the bottom. And his mother says, "It says this person is completely unfit for military service." So if you want to get out of the draft, just tell them, just tell them, no way am I ever going to fight for you guys. I had other situations. My situation, I was fortunate. I lucked out. I didn't have to go. I didn't have to get drafted. But anyway, there was major mutinies. And there's this one guy who was in special forces, and he said, I was doing everything right, but what I was doing wasn't right. So there was this awakening of consciousness in my generation at that time. Then you had, and this was, as I've pointed out many times, what we have here in our country is endless wars abroad and class war at home. So one of the other great rock and roll groups was called Creedence Clearwater Revival, and they have a song called Fortunate Son. You can listen to that song. So these are all anti-war songs, that were, so it's not like our generation was just, just floating along in flower power kind of thing. No, we were really upset. We were trying to change this whole trajectory that the country was on and has continued to go on. So, and then, of course, John Lennon, staged a quote-unquote demonstration in a hotel where he and his lover, Yoko Ono, were staying in this hotel room, and they had a bunch of celebrities there. One of them was Tim Leary, who was, the guy who was advocating LSD. And they had this song, all we are saying is give peace a chance. So let's see, as I say, eventually Lennon became too much for the deep state to tolerate, so they got some poor slob to shoot him to death. Good shot group. John Lennon is standing outside his hotel. This guy comes up to him. He's got a revolver, shoots 5 shots right into his heart. And so this is a hit. It was like a mafia hit. So people say that baby boomers didn't care and the older generation did. That's what they tell us. Our parents were the good generation. Well, we begged you guys to fight the monster. Many of our parents were saying, you need to go to fight the commies in Vietnam. They swallowed this bullshit Cold War propaganda, and they were telling my generation to go fight the stupid war, and we resisted. So when people get this idea that that was the great generation, yes, of course they did fight Hitler, and they had every reason to do so. But when it came time for the younger generation, their kids to fight or not fight, they got it wrong, generally speaking. So there's a song called Monster. This was another group called Steppenwolf. A very powerful song that talks about how America came into being as a country that was giving refuge to people who were escaping from bad situations in Europe, but it turned into a slave-holding, genocidal country, and waging wars everywhere. And so the song is called Monster. It's turned into a monster. And they say at a certain point in the song, the refrain of the song is, America, America, where are you now? Don't you care about your sons and daughters? Don't you know we need you now? We can't fight alone against the monster. Is anybody questioning whether we have a monster running our country right now? And I'm not talking about a specific personality. I'm talking about the system itself has become a monster. So then I ask, well, what happened? Partly it was a question of burnout. The revolutionary rebellion against the war machine ran out of steam. Partly as we got older, people got older, they said, okay, you know, I'm out of college now, I got to get a job, I got to build a career, I want a family. And so the peace movement kind of, and the civil rights movement kind of ran out of steam. But also there was two other factors. One was that there was a deliberate, and this is a conscious attempt. There was a memo written by a Supreme Court justice named Lewis Powell, in which he said, we, the elite, the oligarchs, are in danger of losing control of our country, and we have to do something about it. So they basically staged a multi-year psyop against the American people to crush our consciousness. And how did they do that? Part of how they did that was by distraction and consumerism, but they also killed a lot of people. They killed Phil Oakes, they killed Richard Farina, they killed Janis Joplin, they killed Mark Hampton, I think his name was, an African-American activist. They killed Malcolm X, they killed Martin Luther King, they killed John Kennedy, they killed Robert Kennedy. This is the reality of what my generation faced, and eventually, you know, the powers that be got control of the country, and it's been like that ever since. And at this point, you know, it's hard to say where things are going. You know, Elon Musk says, "Oh, we need a third party." Well, thanks. Another billionaire is going to start a third party. You know, give me a break. You know, we don't need billionaires. We need a movement of the people. But again, if you are, you know, raise too much of a ruckus, they go after you. There was a movement of these guys, African American guys. I think they're like, one of them is at least is in his 80s, and they were doing, you know, social action and community organizing, things like that. I think they took a trip to Russia, and they were taken to court. They were prosecuted, legally persecuted, for the sin of going to Russia, saying they're Russian agents. It's just like ridiculous. But this is the monster. This is what we're up against. So here I am in my tiny little channel. I got like 150 or 200 subscribers. I post things on YouTube. Nobody watches my videos, and, you know. But I don't care, because, you know, it has to be said. So that's what I'm doing. I close by saying that the repression of historical memory has been so successful that many well-meaning critics have forgotten the mass rebellion of the baby boomers during the 1960s, which ended up with many, if not most, giving in to careerism and consumerism. I've maintained that the U.S. has been in a civil war between the oligarchs who wrote the Constitution, heavily favored the interest of capitalism and its final stage, imperialism. How long can this go on until the people can't or won't support it? And the Post also has a DeepSeek AI compilation of repression of baby boomer generation cultural leaders. And there's a lot of them. Jim Morrison was another one. If you were a really successful, rock and roll singer, there was a reasonable, a far higher than normal. How many 27-year-olds die in a given year in a particular career? Well, that's what happened to the big singers, the popular singers in my generation. So that's what I want to talk about in this, giving you some background as to, why I'm posting this, because I want to set the record straight that it's not a question of my generation didn't care. The question is, how much pressure can the system exert on people so that not only do they give up, but the historical memory itself is eradicated. And we have to go back to historical memory. We have to bring back our consciousness of what has happened to us so that we can change things. So that's what I want to talk about. And thank you for listening into my discussion of this post. And again, if you would like to support my work, I very much appreciate your making a donation or buying a T-shirt at one of my online stores. So thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next time.